Okay, let's move on to spring. We're going to focus on Egypt. And this was something that in our last travel night, we surveyed you guys and asked you where you wanted to hear about. This one came back very high on everybody's list. It is on most people's wander list. Technically, this could be a fall, winter, or spring destination, frankly, because the best time to go from a weather standpoint, at least, is October through April. Because it is not as hot, a little bit cooler. It is open to us. It has been open to US citizens with a showing of a proof of negative test within 96 hours of boarding your departure flight. So again, we're going to stay in typical fashion. Bear with us if you are a geography hound. We love to share just to give perspective of where in the world this is and then what we're going to cover. So clearly Egypt is in the northeastern part of Africa. And a lot of times people pair it. They might pair it with Israel, or a lot of people have heard of Petra, which is in Jordan. So I guess the only thing we would say about that is please don't cut any of them too short. If you have enough time, let's do them. But if you don't worry about it, because honestly, I think that you want to give them all their fair shake. But it is interesting because the Mediterranean Sea is on the north, so it's very close to Turkey and Greece. The Red Sea is on its eastern side. So just an interesting, amazing country. And we're going to talk a few things tonight, specifically Cairo. We're going to start in Cairo. Most things in Egypt itineraries begin and end in Cairo because of the access with the airport. We're going to go down the Nile and talk about Luxor and Aswan, and a quick little day trip out to Abu Simbel, which is one of our little favorite little day trips. And then we're going to just quickly talk a little bit about the Sinai Peninsula and the Red Sea. So let's get started. Cairo, of course, a bustling city, big. This is one of the destinations in the world that we usually really do recommend having a personal driver when we do our transfers and private touring, just from a safety standpoint, of course. But like I mentioned, most flights come and go out of here in normal times, and flights actually have pretty good lift to Cairo right now, just because they have pretty much stayed open to us. But Egypt Air from New York's JFK, Washington, D.C.'s Dulles, and then of course from Europe, there's tons, Amsterdam and Paris for those of you in the Midwest, there's direct flights there and plenty of other places. So if this is on your list or planning ahead, we can help advise you. It does take time to get around this city. So you'll notice if we work with you on an itinerary that we are very strategic about times to leave your hotel, times to get there, because traffic is not great. And certain times of the day are better to travel than others in terms of heat and traffic. So we are very methodical about how we map out when to do your touring. Getting to the pyramids, for example, can take a while depending on where you're staying in your hotel. Of course, things to do, some usual suspects, the pyramids at Giza, clearly a must see. The King Tut's mask, his gold death mask, is on the front, or on the right-hand side, which of course is housed in the Museum of Egyptian Antiquities. That has been just really recently remodeled. It is home to over 120,000 antiques and items on display, including its own little mummy room, which is crazy fascinating. This is one of those parts of the world that really blows your mind in terms of history and the cultural decisions and how they did things. The pyramids alone, of course, the scale, and they didn't have the mechanisms and technology we do today. To just hear the stories of how they were built and the purpose behind them is so fascinating. Down in the lower left, that just is a representative of a tour that we like to do, that is the Coptic Christian community. It's an area where it's very religiously significant because there are 5 original Catholic churches. There's the first mosque built in Egypt is there, and it's the oldest synagogue there. So it's a really fascinating historical walking tour that we do in that area. And then of course on the right hand side, some of the open air bazaars that have exotic items and statues and perfumes and jewels and jewelry and spices. It's frankly, for me, it's a photographer's heaven. But just a few highlights. There's more to do, but usually we love to have maybe 3 nights or so in Cairo before we head out of town. But then, of course, we do head out of town and we love to experience the Nile River. It would behoove you, I mean, to not do the Nile while you're there, it would be very remiss of us to not have that on. It is the world's longest river. Although I will say that some of the people in South America think that the Amazon is, so there's a little banter back and forth of which one truly is. It stretches north, so it is one of those kind of juxtaposition rivers where it flows to the north. It starts in Tanzania, it goes through 11 countries. It comes into Egypt from Sudan and it ends in northern Egypt into the Mediterranean. So very fascinating stories behind it. The 99% of Egypt's population utilizes only 5% of its landmass, and much of it is along the Nile River, which is probably not shocking because, as we know, water is where things prosper, whether you're farming or you're industrial and that. So we do love to get people on the river. That might be in a couple ways. This is one where Ama Waterways, which is a favorite river cruise of ours, or Viking, or we've even booked Oberoi has a ship, boat, small ships, small river experiences, maybe 80 to 110 guests at most if they're at capacity, which, as we know now, as they're looking to next year's itinerary, isn't always at capacity. But it's a great way to get on the water and experience the Nile. Usually when we are on the Nile, we are heading south to Luxor. And this is about 300 miles south. And it is, the top 2 images represent the Luxor temple. Lots of shrines, lots of temples. It's home to a granite shrine of Alexander the Great, among many, many, many other things. But again, the scale and the history here is tremendous. The lower left is Karnak Temple, which again is a highlight on the Luxor touring, because usually we spend a day or so there and split up the time. Again, a lot of the touring is done either in the morning or the evening. We don't always have you out in the middle of the day. So if we're going to take a break or do something inside, it's usually then depending on the heat and when you go. And then the lower right represents the Valley of the Kings, which is a must-see. It's known for its burial of many of the kings and the pharaohs during the New Kingdom period. There is, for those of you who are concerned, there is an equal Valley of the Queens, where the wives or some of the princesses were buried and are enshrined. So one or both of those are pretty much always on the Luxor list, if you will. Continuing south, Aswan, not as much to do there. Usually a day or so is great, but it is quieter. It's much quieter vibe on the Nile. It's beautiful scenery. Elephantine Island is literally an island out in the Nile, and it's off the city, so you can feel that you've left the city. It's a great way to walk the streets and get a little exposure to the locals and to some of the culture. The lower left is a souk area where it's just great local markets with tapestries and, again, perfumes and clay pottery and other Egyptian souvenirs if you want. And it is a good place to, on the upper right, experience a felucca ride, which is basically an Egyptian sailboat. Very popular area to get out on the calm waters of the Nile where it's not quite as busy, and fun to just experience it in a different way. And if you're not museumed out by the time you get to Aswan, Nubia Museum is a really great little museum that's very attainable when you're in Aswan. And then we do often suggest, and our partners in Egypt always suggest, doing a day trip to Abu Simbel. It is a long day. Usually you leave from Aswan, you get up, you do an early morning flight to Abu Simbel, but this is amazing UNESCO sites. This is Ramses II. It's known for its big scale temples, and it sits right on the banks of Lake Nasser. And we have we continue to hear from clients when they come back that you have to see it to believe it. Just the scale is so enormous and it's just hard to comprehend. For those of you, just as a side note, who don't want to spend 3, 4, 5 days on the river, we do this also by road, and it is shorter, if you will. So it just depends. We work with each of you to customize it depending on what you're looking to get out of it. Mount Sinai, back up to the north of the country, if you remember the little peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula. Mount Sinai, beautiful. Liz Lewis, I see you commenting in the chat. So it's a funny story. Let me first say that it's about a 2 to 3 hour car ride, depending on where you're going within the mountain range, from Cairo to get there. It is known, of course, in the Bible, depending on your religious acumen, it's known to be where God spoke to Moses through the burning bush. And you can actually see the site of the burning bush. St. Catherine's Monastery is there at the foot of Mount Sinai. And it's also the location where Moses shared the 10 Commandments. So it has a lot of religious significance. But we have had clients, Liz Lewis and her hubby, who have done this hike in the morning at sunrise. And ironically, Liz, on the other side of it, Jim and I have done it at sunset on camel. Now, I could take up the whole hour tonight talking about that, so ask us another day about it, but some funny stories about our camel jockeys and taking camels up the mountainside with cliffs right by us, a little freaky. So beautiful, beautiful region and area. And then, of course, on the peninsula, if you keep heading south, Sharm el-Sheikh and other little village towns is on the coastline of the Red Sea. And it's not just on the peninsula that juts out, it's of course that whole eastern side of Egypt. If you don't know about it, if you're a diver, you know about it. If you don't and you're a snorkel, but you love the water, the Red Sea is one of the top diving and snorkeling locations in the world. It's known. Shark diving, kite surfing, there's also golf in that area, private beaches, of course, just lots of nightlife and stuff, but the Red Sea is known for shipwrecks and coral and fish. So keep it on your list, and depending on how much you have time when you go to Egypt, it might be worth a little side jaunt. Other top trips and things that we think we should be on your wander list for spring: the U.S. Southwest, of course, Utah, Arizona, any of those places, great weather and not as hot. San Antonio, same thing, good weather. Vancouver and Whistler in Canada, in the Pacific Northwest, gorgeous as things come back to life up there. And then we did put on Colombia and Peru. They are open to US citizens. It is a good time to go. Peru is interesting right now because Machu Picchu, which is on a lot of our wander lists, I'm sure, is limiting permits right now to 25%. So imagine going to the Sacred Valley in Machu Picchu with 25% of what they normally let in. Again, like Mark and Michelle said, that if you're comfortable traveling right now, there's actually a lot of benefits to it. Again, based on your comfort level.